This will be the most in-depth meta discussion on Overwatch 2's perks, replacing literally every single bad perk that I think is unhealthy for the game, and replacing it with something completely different that I think will be productive. If you play any of Overwatch 2 and are interested in my ideas for what your perks are, you can either watch the entire video and give me buckets of ad revenue, or you can look at the timestamps and skip to your hero specific. Now, the key thing here is, why are we doing this? If you're not in the loop, Overwatch 2 has a new perk system which is used to progress your character to provide more depth with the character's kit, as well as providing more balancing tweaks to help with character strengths, weaknesses, and shoring up some of those weaknesses without overemphasizing those strengths. It's actually been a lot of fun. There's a lot of more nuance and more fun variety in the gameplay loop, so this isn't just from a balance standpoint, but also just from a fun standpoint, an interesting new direction for Overwatch moving forward. Now, that being said, we have 42 new characters and 4 perks for each character, and some of those perks, the first iteration, weren't that good. Some were not that interesting, some were boring, some were weak, and obviously people's opinions are going to be definitely split on which are which, and we're going to have a new mid-season patch next season. In my recent dev AMA breakdown, we already know the timeline of how these perk adjustments are going to be going. However, I wanted to shoot my shot and provide as many perk options, as much feedback as I possibly can, because I generally don't believe in just criticizing if I can also provide some sort of positive feedback and something that I would replace instead. If I'm going to throw stones, I'm going to at least provide an alternative. So today we're going to be going over 100 perk fixes for over the 42 characters in the Overwatch cast. Let's get started. First things first, how do we decide what's a bad perk and what's a good perk? What were the parameters by which this whole perk project was started with? Number one, it was with the structure that minor perks don't necessarily have to change the gameplay loop, but majors should, so we highlighted some of those that don't. We do like cost benefit with perks, not just free value all the time, especially for major perks. I think it's important that we don't just power creep literally everything, especially with some of the more powerful perks. It's really important that there's at least something of a downside. I think having both perks being equally good is optimal, but I don't think that's always possible. At the very least, we would like a situational choice where this one is better in that situation, or that one's good in that situation, or at the very least, this one's clearly the better perk, but also that one's just very fun, so you might use it for fun. It would be really great if perks introduced counterplay options they didn't have before. A great example of this would be Sigma's Float, which doesn't make Sigma a dive tank, but it does at least give Sigma some verticality when he doesn't. We shouldn't overemphasize an already present strength too much, because I think then we actually make counter swapping worse. An example of this one would be Brigitte's armor pack buff, which just makes her a lot stronger versus dive characters, that's not really something that she really needs right now. The other thing to point out is we're not as focused on the system of the perks itself, as in like the progression rate, keeping perks, losing perks. That's something for a different video, for a different time. We're focusing on the perks themselves. And finally, we're not really concerned with the balance, win rates, or power of the individual perks, so much as the design. I think it's really easy to tweak the numbers of perks or even the heroes underneath the perks to find balance if needed, but I was more focused on what perks just aren't that interesting, aren't that healthy, frustrating to play against, or frustrating to play with, and what can we do to replace them with. It's also worth keeping in mind that I do think that these perks are going to be swapped out just for the sake of variety too, so having a couple of extra ideas, even for characters that already have healthy perks, may be a good idea. Finally, I want to give a big shout out to my community that was able to help me with a lot of these ideas. Whenever I do big, massive projects like these, I do like to involve my Twitch and Discord community and my YouTube community as well, because I think in the past when we've done rework projects, a pretty large percentage of the ideas came straight from the community. So shout out to my Discord. I think around 30 to 40% of these ideas were from them. And then in addition, all of my ideas, I was able to spit back to my Twitch chat, and they were able to give me feedback on things that I could be doing better as well. So even the ones that were my idea, they were able to criticize and make adjustments based off of the feedback that they gave me. And finally, guys, these are just fun ideas. These are not perfectly well thought out and balanced. There's over 100, I think there's like 110 of them. So if you don't like any of them, that's to be expected. I don't expect everyone to agree with me in every single one. But the reality is that even the perks that we have, people still don't like them. So this is not so much as like, oh, these are perfect set in stone, these are the greatest things ever. This is like 20 hours of brainstorming for 42 different characters. I think that we're fairly confident that these are worth at least considering and testing, or at least implementing temporarily, but these aren't necessarily, oh, this has to be implemented the base kit and it should be like this all the way. So I know there's going to be some comments that are just going to completely miss this point. Honestly, IQ check. If you can't listen to this, then you're not worth my time. But at the same time, for those that are on the fence, it's kind of just giving you guys a heads up that this isn't going to be like, this has to be this way, this has to be the case. We're already dealing with crazy gameplay changes, both good and bad with the perks that we currently have. I'm just trying to give us more options that obviously with how many we've put out, just like the developers, may not be fully tested and fully thought through all the way. So keep that in mind here. Okay, so let's start off with tanks, starting off with D.Va. This one, I wasn't as big of a fan with Bunny Stomp. I think it's a fun idea, and I think it's definitely something that they can keep, but if we're looking for another minor perk to insert at some point in time, I think a baby dash ability, maybe a slide and a reload with a weapon might be good. I think in general, I've heard that this is something that they have in Heroes of the Storm, but if we're going to be utilizing something along with baby D.Va, I think allowing her to function, maybe even having ability while a baby would be fun. Allow you to actually have a little bit more impact while you're fishing for your remake. And then I'm not the biggest fan of heavy rockets. I don't think it's really clear exactly what the value of heavy rockets is outside of doing a little bit more damage versus armor because of the way armor is calculated. It just doesn't feel like it's the best perk in all situations, and it feels like the situations when it's better are super niche because the Matrix perk is really strong. So I thought, why don't we go in a different direction? Whereas the one Matrix perk gives her a little bit more self-sufficiency, allows her to spread the map a little bit more. What if you can't spread the map a little bit more? What if you're playing in a really compressed base versus hard counters? What if Defense Matrix reduced all damage sources, beams and melees included, by 40%? Now the obvious thing is, okay, Zarya, it's got to deal with the Zarya matchup, but the more that we thought about with chat, Ramattra, Rein, Melee, Genji, anything Hazard even, all these basically melee-oriented and/or beam-oriented characters, Symmetra, Moira, are going to deal with a little bit of the damage reduction there. Now, I think the crucial thing is this is where we need to introduce a trade-off, because having being Matrix reduce the damage a little bit, or a significant amount, is a big buff for D.Va. So I think what you'd have to do is you'd either cut Matrix duration down by half a second, or maybe even a full second. And so what this means is that D.Va's actually weaker versus the characters that she's traditionally stronger versus, but stronger versus the characters that she's traditionally weaker versus. So if you want to force D.Va in that situation, you can. It's just going to mean that you're going to be giving something up. And I think that's the perfect direction that a major perk should go. Next, let's move on to Doomfist. I think Doomfist just has a bloat of really not very useful perks. Hitting an enemy with Rocket Punch reloads hand cannon ammo. The best defense grants overhealth here. I highly recommend you guys pulling up the wiki while you're pulling up this video. I'm not going to explain what every perk does. Not the most useful. Very niche circumstances where they're useful, or you don't really feel them. And that's kind of crucial as well with Seismic Empowerment, where that one is really good if you get it, but it actually is really hard to get. It's almost impossible to get in a lot of situations. It's one of those niche perks where even in the situations where it might work, it rarely does. So the Power Matrix one is just better always, and I think that needs to change. Generally, I think this guy just needs slam damage. This is irrelevant to the perks. I think 50 damage on a slam is one of the reasons that this character is so empowered punch focused right now, and it prevents him from being able to shift some of the power away from that, which is the most annoying aspect of playing into him. I also think that they should consider whether the parry itself should charge punch, and if it does, which that's fine, then it needs to not do so at an increased rate, because remember, block has damage reduction. So it's harder to charge punch without the perk, but it's easier with. I'm not going to go into the details there, but it shouldn't be like that. I think that makes that perk too broken. A couple of ideas here. In general, minor, less movement penalty on block. I think that would be really useful for being able to move at a much faster rate with block, feel a lot more fluid with the character. I would reduce the cooldown on slam the more targets that you hit. That would also be a minor perk. So maybe half of a second damage cooldown reduction every single time that you hit a slam on a target. Now, I would say you reduce the slam on the reduce the cooldown on slam specifically. So if you hit a big slam, you might have 2 seconds left on slam again. I think that would also be a minor. Some suggestions from the community: maybe punch omnidirectional, so you can go up, down, wherever, but you lose distance. That would be a major. A lot of people are asking for uppercut, and we're asking to lose the block. I think that's a really bad idea, because I don't think the tank can function without block, without going back to Overwatch 1 Doomfist, which is like super high risk, high reward. I think that's just completely pipe dream. But if you were to lose empowered punch, so you get the damage reduction, but you actually you don't empower your punch from it, right? So I could see a world where uppercut is filled in there. The question people are asking, like, what keybind would it fill? I'm not really sure. Maybe reload, because he doesn't need a reload. But if you were going to insert uppercut, it would be at the replacement of empowered punch. So you take away some CC while you give them some CC, and you don't crash his tankiness. I think another minor perk that might be worth considering is burst heal on ultimate. This is something I've been asking for a long time, so that you're not rewarded for sitting in ultimate. That's actually, I think, the weakest part of his ultimate. The ultimate itself is fine. Like, it's a second life. It's a full heal, technically, almost. It's a repositioning tool. It's a reset your cooldowns. It's great. But the problem is you have to sit in the ultimate too long. You kind of let the fight state reestablish, stabilize, essentially. And that means that the opportunities that were initially there are no longer there, not to mention your team is fighting 4v5. I think burst heal, like 150, 200 healing early, will reward people for actually cycling the ultimate instead of just sitting in the ultimate. I think that's a huge quality of life change that should definitely be considered. And then off of that, I think you could even make the ult ultimate radius larger. So the inner cone, excuse me, should be larger, and or the minimum damage should go up a little bit. It's too small right now. Now you'd have to probably nerf the slow from the ultimate, because I think that is the strongest part of the ultimate, minus the inner cone. But yeah, just some different ideas to consider here. So for Hazard, I wasn't as big of a fan of Reconstruction, which is the getting more block resource off of the block, off of the wall. I don't like leaning more into block damage reduction. And then off of that Anarchic Zeal, which is the lifesteal on the spike guards. Again, it's just kind of more sustained with the character, which is, he already is pretty good with sustain, and I don't think he should necessarily get stronger with sustain. So we were thinking about, like, what if the little, I don't know what they're called, the nanobots with the spikes that he does with his block actually leech to nearby targets within 7 or 8 meters, kind of like Chain Lightning with Winston. That would be a minor perk. So this kind of rewards more of an offensive AoE focus with your damage on your block. Very minor perk. I don't know how useful it would be, worth considering about. So we were thinking also, what more can we do with this wall? His wall already does so much already. Some people are thinking, could we detonate the wall? I think that would be broken, because it would just enhance his one-shot capability, which is already really strong. His burst is really good. So we're thinking maybe he could have like a Groot wall from Marvel Rivals effect, where if you damage within a certain, if you're shooting or damaging or using a certain ability within a certain range of your wall, maybe even blocking with your wall, near your wall, it does the wall leeches and does damage behind. So it's kind of like Groot wall. Maybe a longer range, maybe a bleed effect with your wall. There's just different like little offensive things that you could do, but it can't be burst damage, and I don't think it can be sustained, like no more HP to the wall. Another one I was thinking is maybe wall gives over health for Hazard. So if he hits the wall, or they hit into the wall, or he's near the wall, it slowly regenerates over health. You'd have to carefully consider this one again for sustain, but anything that's sustained away from just the block, I'm okay with. But again, I'm not really sure how you do that. Now, the reason why I think that might be interesting is because Hazard walling is most of the time used from medium to medium range, right? Kind of forcing a split or isolating a kill. It is very often frequently used for you to block off an LOS shooting onto you. I'm not gonna get into the weeds of this one too much, but maybe that rewards that type of playstyle a little bit more. So it's more of like a wall for defensive purposes. Again, just throwing spitballs out there. It's actually pretty difficult to come up with perks for Hazard, because I think he already has a lot going on right now. So anyway, we're gonna move on here. Junkerqueen, deep wounds. Scattergun extends wounds. Not as big of a fan of that one. It's not the most thoughtful thing here. I think her major perk, where it increases her lifesteal with Carnage, is actually pretty cool, because it gives her more frontline presence, but she still struggles in that poke range. I don't think Deep Wounds is good enough to handle with that. Our idea was, let's reduce her shotgun damage total, so like reduce her total amount of frontline presence, but you tighten the spread. So she's actually able to poke, not crazy well, but much better. So in these more long range situations, she's a little bit more viable. I wouldn't mind shout to provoke a bleed. I wouldn't mind a larger shout radius. I wouldn't even mind a tighter radius, but a faster shout. Again, this would be probably a minor, but something to consider with the character. Another idea I had, this one would probably be broken, but it would be really fun, is knife pulls have lateral crosshair control. So in other words, if you stick your knife and you move your crosshair either right or left, you're able to pull them to a certain percentage to that right or to the left. So it would follow your crosshair, essentially, when you recall your knife. Now, you wouldn't be able to pull them up. Well, maybe you would be able to pull them up now that I think about it. Now, we'd have to keep an eye on this one. This one could be too broken for repositioning or boops or CC in general. But the knife already has the CC. It's always towards the Junkerqueen. But what if you could control it a little bit more? I think that would be actually super, super fun. Definitely would have to be a major perk. Maybe it would be compensated by less of a pull, like less of a distance. I don't really know. Maybe it'd be compensated by less of a bleed damage. Again, I don't really know, but I think this one would be really fun. This is going to sound crazy. I actually think Mauga perks are fine. I think any of our problems that we have with Mauga are problems with Mauga himself, but I actually think they did a pretty good job opening up some different playstyle options and some different choices with the character. Even some of the overhealth sustain is like, that's the most healthy version of his sustain rather than just his lifesteal. Being rewarded for running in. His 2 hearts perk is kind of funny. They're pretty good perks, and I'm not saying that they're not going to change things up just for the sake of changing things up, but any problems that I have with Mauga are not with the perks. I think the perks are actually a pretty good progression of a character that started really, really bad and is still pretty bad, but has gotten a lot better over the last year, so nice job, devs. Orisa. So let's talk about Orisa. I actually think Orisa perks are okay, but I have a lot of ideas that we're going to throw in here. So Orisa, Heat Dissipator, critical hits from your primary fire, refund heat. I think it's an interesting idea. I would prefer it if it worked on Fortify over Heat. So in other words, when you press Fortify, it prevents your gun from overheating, kind of like it used to. That seems a little bit more consistent value and opens up more thought process of how I use my my Fortify timing. Now I'm gonna get in the weeds a little bit with this one, so stand with me. Javelin spin, helicopter, major. You get verticality with javelin spin. I've talked about this a lot of times. I think that Orisa having a little bit of verticality, if you can axe other aspects of her survivability, would be awesome. Obviously, it would be limited verticality in the same way that Sigma's, but this is something they actually did with Junkenstein's lab, and it actually was very buggy. It actually pulled you forward. I didn't like that, but I think it's an idea that they should lean into a little bit more. Now, I have an old gun concept I did with an Orisa rework, which was the lower heat that your weapon is, the tighter your gun spread. The higher your heat your gun is, like towards the end of the meter, the faster the fire rate, but the worse the spread. So basically, it actually doesn't just say, oh, high heat gun bad. It says, actually, you need to manage when your gun is heated or not, because it's very effective up close when it's high heat, but it's very ineffective at long ranges. And so you actually have a bit of a poke weapon. It's just very slow in low heat. And then overheat, like basically when you overheat, you actually burn your javelin. So your javelin actually has a burning DOT, like a 30-40 burning DOT. This would be maybe more into a base kit, maybe a major perk, I'm not really sure, but I think there's a whole overheat aspect to her weapon that's completely wasted, and that could be really fun with a character. Javelin spin would cool your heat, it would lower your damage, and yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I won't go into the weeds with that one, but there's like a whole lot of heat management that you could lean into with the weapon, providing different choices and different abilities. Like again, Fortify cools you down, or Fortify locks your heat at that, or Javelin spin cools you down. And if we're not going to have a Javelin spin for verticality, I think some sort of horse leap or lunge would be really good. Basically, her whole hero fantasy is just completely unintuitive. It doesn't, her visuals don't match what she actually does, which is honestly a really shame. Okay, Ramattra here. I don't know. I think prolonged barrier, the longer barrier duration, is actually underrated. I think it's really quite strong, but it's just really boring. A longer shield is not that interesting. And nanite repair is not something that Ramattra needs. He already has a lot of frontline presence. I think the Vengeful Vortex is awesome. I'm very glad that they actually, I don't know if that's my idea, but that's something that we've been asking for a long time. And Void Surge is pretty cool too. Now, there's some tweaks to Void Surge we'll talk about in a second. First things first, though, instead of prolonged barrier, or maybe actually, I don't know where you're gonna replace these, but TLDR, reduce the shield HP to 400. So axe it to, I think it's 1200 right now, cut it to 400, tiny little paper shield, right? But the cooldown is half. So there's actually a point of layering the cooldown at different points of time. It's not healthy for a tank to have a 13-second cooldown. In a shield, it's basically unbreakable for the duration that it's up. It makes the gameplay loop very predictable and very singular focus. It's ironic that we talk about the first tempo tank, but the character is literally nothing but a tempo tank in terms of he has cycle, he has cycle, he has cycle, he has cycle. There's no sorts of depths or nuance. Like, do I use my bubble like Zarya aggressively or defensively? Do I hold both? Do I use one early? Do I, as Winston, go for backline? Do I trade frontline and force bubble and force a resource trade and then take an angle? With Ramattra, it's basically the same gameplay loop over and over and again, and it's because of the length of his cooldowns. They're very effective cooldowns, but they're very long. And I think that you should cut the cooldown potency down, but also cut the length down as well. So there's more ways of layering his abilities and managing his abilities. And going off of that one here, this is a community idea called fluid stances. Basically, minimal duration that you could use Nemesis form is reduced to around 3 seconds. So you can use the ability and you can cancel it whenever. However, if you refund your Nemesis form at any point in time, if you refund your Nemesis form really early, you're refunded a portion of the cooldown back. So if I cancel my Nemesis form early, I get 3 or 4 seconds of it reduced. So I can go in and out and in and out much faster than I currently can. Right now, you're basically encouraged or forced to, once you commit, you got to commit all the way. Now, some of you in chat maybe go, oh, but what about the armor heal? Because he gets bonus armor. You're gonna have to cut that way down. You're gonna have to cut that way down 100%, so you don't abuse cycling back and forth. You could also consider, it doesn't grant additional armor, but it grants additional speed boost in Nemesis form. So basically, if you combine those two perks, or maybe even just base kit changes, you have a situation where actually layering, okay, shield, poke, and then I go Nemesis form, and then I go back and I shield again and I poke, but you could break the shield, and you can actually kill me in Nemesis form, and I'm not like an infinite HP machine. Really interesting idea from the community that actually worked really well with one of my ideas. And then one more thing as well, I think instead of the current iteration of Void Surge that we have, which is really cool, it's more damage, but the promise is that it just emphasizes a strength that Ramattra already has, which is shooting tank or shooting shields. He's really good at that. But the problem is that his primary fire in Omnic form is very slow. It's very hard to track anything that's further than 15 or 20 meters that isn't a tank. And so what this means is that it shores up that strength, but it doesn't actually allow you to shoot other things. We actually saw it last night, Ramattra versus Mauga. Ramattra was actually chunking Mauga now with that perk. But again, it's a strength that he already has. I would love if they replaced that with just faster projectile speed. Just faster projectile, even reduce damage, reduce his total output of damage, but actually allow you to shoot something other than tank, because that is the absolute worst part about Omnic form right now. And I think I would love to see that change at some point in the future. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving here. Ryan has a lot of kind of weak perks. Crusader's Resolve is interesting. Maybe some tweaks to that. Maybe we'll talk about that in a second. Fury uptake, barrier field is healed for 100% of fire strikes. Again, not that useful. Shield Slime is blech, doesn't feel really that good. I've heard some mixed things about Shield Slime. I'm not sure how I feel about it, honestly. It doesn't really feel like it's necessary. Knocking people away is not necessarily something you want to do. And not to mention the keybind option is also really uncomfortable because it prevents you from third person turning your camera, because it's the same keybind. So projectile speed and fire strike, I think would be a really easy change just to improve the situations where Ryan can contribute on spaces far away. So 10, 15, 20 meter faster fire strike would be a minor perk. Fire strike does 30 burn damage over 2 seconds. Minor perk. Change the minor in terms of the Crusader's Resolve, so that's not reliant on holding shield. In other words, if you don't take damage for 3 seconds, period, whether you're holding shield or not, you start to regenerate HP, and that would just make it, again, this is more of a dive Reinhardt playstyle, which I actually think Crusader's Resolve is underrated. The problem is that if I pin backline and flank like an LH Cloudy style, I don't want to have to hold my shield to prompt the faster regeneration. I think it should just happen automatically. It's not going to make Ryan broken in frontline trades. It's not a good perk for frontline trades at all, but it's going to help him in that situation. I wouldn't mind if Fire Strike was an explosive AoE that didn't pierce. So the first thing it hits, small explosion. Great ability when everyone's clumped and standing in a line, but as people start to spread out, not as useful. Well, now that might change that a little bit. You'd have to scale the damage again, think less about the balance and more about the situations where Fire Strike would change how it's being used. Pin is reduced in cooldown by 1 or 2 seconds if nobody hits. It's an idea we've seen with Genji Dash. Do it with the same thing with Pin. Allow you to reposition more consistently, more often. And then maybe even a Berserker passive, something that we saw way back in Mirror Watch, where the more times that you swing and you hit somebody, the faster you swing. Like, let's say that you hit 4 swings in a row. You now swing 20% faster. Would be a relatively niche perk, but again would help Ryan in those frontline trades versus those tanks. We all know what tanks we're talking about here that feel like he should be able to punish a little bit more. So I'm going to consider, there's a lot of little ideas here, and let me know what you guys think. All right, Roadhog. Now, I had a lot of ideas with Roadhog back in the day in reworks. I almost skipped Roadhog entirely because I really just hate the character. I think some of his perks are okay. I think Scrap Hook and Hog Toss are just perks that I don't like very much. I think the Reload one is kind of just free value, kind of free real estate. Doesn't really provide any sort of interesting nuance or thought. And while it is a minor perk, I do think that potentially we could do a little better. Maybe not. I think Take a Breather speed is pretty cool. The problem obviously is that's going to be often utilized to get out of jail instead of just setting up offensive plays. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. And the Hog Regen exposure is just something that's just... It doesn't work very well with the way that the character plays and the way the game is supposed to be played. Generally, you don't want to be clumping around your Hog. He's kind of a punching bag. Either he's on the flank or on frontline and not somewhere where you want to be benefiting from. So some interesting ideas. There was an idea that we had in our rework project a long time ago with Roadhog that didn't make the final cut, but I saw it recently from another perk rework video by PopCorp, which was a pig pin is kind of like a trampoline. That was what we called it when we first did it. It was actually one of my community's ideas about 2 years ago. And PopCorp brought up a great, actually a little workshop code there that I think actually looks pretty interesting. So I want to highlight PopCorp there for reminding me of that because I like that. I think that's an interesting idea. So you basically, pig pin can be detonated to send you up, just you, but a little bit of verticality, kind of like Sigma. Alt Fire Back would be great at the expense of maybe some heal resource, so you're more of a poke tank, more of an angle tank, rather than a frontline tank. Again, I think everything has to be at a cost with Roadhog. We have to be very careful of this character. This character is really bad to be meta. Some form of belly boop, maybe, for a brawl tank. Like if he doesn't choose that, maybe he gets like a belly boop or a body slam. Again, there's a lot of ideas that we had here. I would say Take a Breather does less healing, but provides more damage reduction, situations where that may be useful. And then another one, which I thought was really kind of weird, but something to think about, was tossing a can of Hog Regen at an allies. Either it could be targeted, like it just like auto locks, like it's like a Harmony Orb kind of a UI thing, or it's an AoE like Lamp, like a small AoE like Lamp or Soldier Healing Field. And when he throws it, either the person either gets a direct heal damage boost or attack speed, or that small area gets a heal damage boost or attack speed. Doing so costs you a certain percentage of your heal resource. But what this allows you to do is allows you to actually support allies in different ways. Now, what the perk should be, I don't think it should be speed boost necessarily, which I know it's crazy for me to not say speed boost. I think it would probably be a small heal and a small temporary damage boost. Whether that should be an area of effect, I'm not as big of a fan of that idea because I think area of effect abilities are really kind of awkward in Overwatch. Like Baptiste Lamp is a great example of one that doesn't work very well in Overwatch 2 because of how spread out fights are. Maybe it's a single targeted ability. Maybe it takes a third of his heal resource. But again, you kind of have a hog that isn't just DPS, 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 but it's a hog that actually has to manage some of his resources and think, okay, do I want to enable that angle for my DPS? Okay, that's going to might compromise my speed. And oh, do I want alt fire back, which means I play more poke, but I'm a lot more fragile here? Do I want to take a breather that provides less healing because I already have a strong healing core, but provides more damage reduction so I can live versus CC better? Like, there's a lot of like little thoughts here that I think can be kind of exploited a little bit more to make this character a little bit healthier. I don't know if his design is really redeemable, to be honest with you guys. One other thing as well, I thought maybe you could have the whole Winter Soldier Bucky from Marvel Rivals thing with this hook, where the normal hook just goes a certain distance, right? But if you wind up the hook, charge the hook, you can go further. Like, I think the current distance he has is probably too far without a wind up. So if we can extend his range by 10, 15 meters to his current range, so in other words, Roadhog hook is shorter range unless you wind it up. That's definitely going to be a nerf, but I think that would be a healthy long-term thing for him. Anyway, long story short, we're gonna move on to Sigma. I actually like Sigma's perk. The only one I would change here is I think Kinetic Cycle is just too unbelievably strong. It's basically free damage reduction or cooldown reduction for accretion that does scale, but it's really easy to cut down like 4 or 5 seconds on accretion. I think it just needs to be nerfed a tiny bit because I don't really see a world where massive impact is that useful compared to Kinetic Cycle. So yeah, I like Sigma's perks. No real critiques here. Okay, Winston here. Not sure how I feel about Heavy Landing from Primal Rage. It's actually really strong. It's one of the most underrated perks. I remember when it came out, the day people came out, oh, it's not that strong, I was like, bro, are you kidding me? It's literally free value. Like, you don't even have to fully charge. It's like an extra 30, 40 landing damage is huge. And freaking Gusho is just destroying everybody with it. So I think that one might be a little bit strong. I think either Short Circuit needs to be replaced or it needs to be significantly buffed. People need to realize what a deployable is. A lot of shields are deployables, and I think people are forgetting that. So it is actually not something that you want to use all the time, but there are circumstances where it's kind of useful. The problem is that 30% when compared to Heavy Landing, which is 75% of your landing damage, even during an ultimate, it's just not worth it. So I think if we're going to keep Short Circuit, it needs to be significantly buffed, 50, 60, 70, whatever percent. And then like you could actually like, you could almost like 2-tap a Torb turret with alt fire, right? Like that would be like, oh, yay, I actually, there's a reason to pick it, right? Minor perk would be reducing the alternate fire delay so that you shoot your range fire and then you do your primary fire. That delay makes combos a lot harder. This one might be too much of a buff, but I do think that one probably, it would be a nice little quality of life thing if they were to introduce another minor buff. And then Popcorp came up the idea where you could reset your jump on melee final blows. That one might be a little bit broken, a little bit niche, but it's an interesting idea that I had not come up with. So credit to Popcorp, and we're gonna keep going here. A lot of other ideas people came up with Winston, and I don't like those ideas. I think his character is really svelte. I think it's perfect. I think a lot of his designs are really pretty, so we want to avoid doing too much with the character. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's gonna apply to a couple other characters in this list as well. Wrecking Ball. I'm unsure on Steamroller. I think Steamroller, which is pretty useful, and will especially be useful in 6v6 and certainly open queue as well. I think maybe to replace that, we might have Wrecking Ball ignore a portion of or all of the tank passive with his boop. Wrecking Ball doesn't have as much of an impact in the frontline presence, but being able to displace tanks a little bit more would honestly, I think, feel a lot better than just doing more damage. Anyway, something to consider. And then finally, I think Wrecking Ball could use either an immunity to CC at the expense of a large portion of his HP or shields. I don't think it should be permanent immunity by any means, but it should be when he pops shields, there's a brief 1-second parry window, just like Doomfist. This is something I've been asking for to try for a long time. So there's a ways of outplaying CC, but if you do choose that perk, you're more vulnerable. I think in general, Wrecking Ball just struggles from either being immediately one-shot because he has not very much consistent counterplay to CC, especially given how hard he is to play, or just completely unkillable because you need CC to kill him. It's just this weird dichotomy that I think you can work on perks and maybe even the base characters kit to introduce ways of doing that. Maybe some slow immunity, if not full CC immunity at a certain point in time. I'm not really sure, but I think perks should try to rotate and revolve around that. Other than that, I think some of his perks are pretty fun. I think the slam perk is pretty good. I think the shield perk is also underrated. Also, shout out to the developers for proving everybody wrong. I definitely felt like the Wrecking Ball shields were an underrated aspect of his kit, and the more that I see Wrecking Ball being played in pro play and even rank play, I'm seeing the shield share being used more and more and more, which is pretty cool. Zarya. Energy Lance is a weird one because it's too OP in low ranks and it's too bad in high ranks. You don't see people clumping up in high ranks. It's just not good, especially versus Zarya. And yet you see that all the time in low to mid ranks. And so piercing with beam is way too strong. So I just don't think it's that good, and the grav one's kind of weird too. I think an interesting way to change that one might be alternate fire takes less ammo, minor. So the problem with Zarya is that she doesn't have a lot of range. Okay, why? Because her alt fire is a little bit hard to land, which is fine. You know, it's good that she has some limitations at range, but the problem is that she's stuck reloading a long reload animation consistently, because I think it's, what is it, 4 or 5 shots to reload, which is crazy with alt fire. It's just not good. So how about it takes 50% less ammo? You're able to shoot 5, 6, 7 times before you have to reload. This would probably be a minor perk, but I think huge quality of life change for DPS uptime. Honestly, it might even need to be a major perk. It's pretty potent in the right hands, but it would shore up her strengths or weaknesses without being overwhelmingly frustrating. Another one would be you could charge up alt fire for a faster projectile speed. So you tap your alt fire, you charge up the right click. It doesn't do more damage, but it has a faster projectile speed. Now, doing so means that you're losing out on damage, and I think you could actually argue that charging up your alt fire could consume a little bit of ammo in the same way that Zenyatta's right click essentially does. So charging it up means that you get more range against targets that you couldn't otherwise shoot with your alt fire, but it does come at the cost of damage uptime and ammo. Again, providing her with more situations where you can skillfully demonstrate your mechanics, your outplay capability without actually being a legitimate poke tank. It just provides more opportunities. Again, I think these ideas would be very interesting. All right, we're gonna move on to damage here. And let's get started here. So Ashe, I think the problem with Ashe is that she's a really svelte, again, DPS character. I think she's probably the healthiest sniper character that we have in Overwatch. And her perks mean that she just basically plays pretty much the exact same. She just plays like Ashe. It doesn't really change her playstyle. And I was kind of hitting my head at the wall over and over again with this character until I realized that maybe we don't really need to change anything about her. Maybe her perks would just need to be small little buffs here and there, or nerfs here and there, or just adjustments without really changing any of her gameplay loop, because I don't think we want to change that. So we're going to have a couple of ideas here. I think purposely detonating dynamite on the floor could leave a lava pool, similar to Torbjorn ult. Not that much damage necessarily, but it would change maybe how you choose to use dynamite in certain situations. I think the current dynamite iteration doesn't really change how you utilize dynamite at all. It's just more range, and I think that's kind of lame. Maybe freezing Bob with his second input, so you press Q and you can press him again to freeze him. Maybe that'd be too strong. Or maybe you could even use Coach Gun to move Bob. Again, I don't really know how useful that would be. You could dynamite yourself to give yourself a speed boost, and you dynamite no longer damages yourself. Again, maybe that would just help for rotations, right? The ability to rotate around the map and again, change some of your gameplay choices. It would even help in peeling yourself at the expense of your offensive output. Again, I'm not really sweating with Ashe too much, because I think the character is already in a good spot. And so if her perks aren't really that creative or clever, that's fine. Her kit is already creative and clever, and maybe we don't need to change that much about it. Bastion, speaking of which, totally fine. Perks are great. The only thing I'd say is just make sure that he actually has to use resource to heal. Having infinite resource has to be a bug. And Lindholm explosives needs to give ult charge. I think currently right now, last I checked, it doesn't give ult charge. That might have changed at the time of this video being posted. But it just needs to give ult charge. But yeah, Bastion has good perks. Good stuff, dev team. Cassidy. Pretty simple kit. I think Bang Bang is a little bit lame. The second flashbang that goes along doesn't really change too much how you use it or how you do it. It has a little bit more range, but other than that, it's not all that interesting. I don't really have any suggestions for that, so I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I would say that changing past noon for any high noon cancel would be huge. So instead of just canceling it at the end of the duration, if you can't use high noon to reload or just cancel high noon early, you're automatically refunded 30% at any time. I think it'd be a huge quality of life change for that perk and actually reward a lot of different cool plays, which I think is super underrated. Please change this. I think the gunslinging damage reduction, or the cooldown reduction, is probably too much. It's not just that Bang Bang is kind of weird and weak. It's also that the gunslinging reduction is just too good not to use. It's half of your cooldown. So I think that needs to be nerfed down to like 2 seconds or even 1 second. For another major perk, maybe instead of the Bang Bang, and this one might be broken. Okay, we got it cooked, okay? What if you could use your abilities in high noon? I mean, all of them. I mean, not your gun, obviously, but your roll and also your flashbang. Weird. Would allow you some counterplay in some situations, would definitely make the ultimate a lot stronger. Yeah, I'm gonna let that one sit and cook. Just think about it. Might be a little silly, would definitely be a major perk, I think. Okay, Echo, full salvo. You know, it's not great. I get the idea of like trying to carpet a floor with explosives, but it ultimately just ends up being a bit of a buff, and I'm not a huge fan of the idea here. I would love a lower damage on stickies, but faster projectile speed, so that you can actually hit them from further away more consistently. Certain compositions that would be very useful, but obviously you'd be giving up a lot of your damage on tanks and or dive characters, so we're something worth considering. I think the problem with Echo is that a lot of her problems revolve around her HP and survivability, and I think a lot of that is just her HP. So maybe more than anything else, Echo might need some nerfs here and there with their damage output, but I honestly think that she's one of those characters that's sitting at 225, maybe the only character that's sitting at 225 that I think deserves 250. And that's unrelated to perks. But anyway, maybe she gets shield health. I think this was an idea that I had where maybe that's some of her survivability woes, and it's very lore appropriate, right? Why does this, maybe this doesn't even need to be a perk, like just 75, 100 shield. It makes sense with the lore. It provides a little bit more of that survivability, a little bit more of that self-sustain that she desperately lacks. And it would definitely help with her self-regen out of combat. So less perk ideas outside of the stickies change, but more on that, just something to consider about the character. Okay, Genji. So I was swamped with Genji feedback, which is kind of funny. It's always the case with Genji. Genji mains are very passionate about the character, which I really love. But I think with Genji, we wanted to be kind of like the Winston theory, the Ashe theory, where less is more. The character's great. The character's fun. The character's very svelte and well-designed. We don't want to add a lot of fluff to him. So we're not trying to keep the perks either relatively simple or low-hanging fruit without delving too deep. I think acrobatics sucks. Having swift strike resets double jump is unbelievably niche versus certain flyers, maybe, and it's just infinitely worse than the minor perk, which is just unfortunate. And also blade twisting. Now, I heard that the DOT does apply in your blade slash, but that definitely just feels like a bug because the swift strike applying 25 damage after an elimination is just incredibly bad. And it saddens me, unless it's bugged, to see how many high-level Genjis are using it because it's just worse in every aspect. Having elimination rewards being a prerequisite for the perk to be good is just not a good idea in an elimination-based game where an elimination already significantly increases your chance of winning the fight. So it's essentially a clip farming perk, and it's not a very good one at that. So instead, I think there's some options that we could do with dash, where if there's 15 more dash damage for better breakpoints. Dash rewards ammo, just a little bit of ammo, so for more consistent pressure output. Using a dash but not hitting with the dash actually reduces the cooldown on dash by a small amount. This would probably be a major perk. That's actually something that we saw in Junkenstein's, I think it was the Junkenstein's Revenge, but we've seen it actually recently. I think that would be a big one. I think some of the changes they need to do with the perks that are currently using, like Lifesteal Blade, is it needs to be a flat heal that's not a percentage of the damage to the output. The problem that we have with Genji right now, and one of the reasons why we've always been afraid of buffing him, is that Nano Blade is just always a fight winner in low ranks and high ranks and pro league. So I think Lifesteal Blade kind of exacerbates that, basically makes Nano Blade unkillable, which I know people are going to be like, oh, it's 2 ults, it should be unkillable. No, I think Nano Blade is probably the most powerful ult combo in the game. You can literally kill anything with it, and it's almost unstoppable, even with multiple support ults. And I think that shouldn't be the case. It's the reason why Genji's they've been so afraid of Genji being meta is because of that combo, and so it's hurting Genji mains. And I think changing it to a flat heal and Lifesteal Blade would still mean that's very potent as a naked blade, maybe even more potent, but less so with damage boosted blade. And then acrobatics, the really simple thing that changed acrobatics is that it can work on swift strike, sure, but why don't we get a double jump reset on wall climb? That's gonna be way more consistently useful and provide a lot of fun setups and fun plays. Like if we're gonna make the character like stronger, let's do so in a fun way. You know, like lean more into that mobility. Some of the stuff that early Overwatch 1 that they're always nerfing, which I think was a mistake. And I think they're more open to that idea right now. So anyway, we'll keep going here. So Hanzo kind of feels like Scatter Arrows underperforms. I actually skipped Hanzo initially. I was kind of being a baby about it because I was just very frustrated at the character. I just don't feel like there's a lot they can do with the character. I think that, you know, Yamagami wall climb accelerates lunge cooldown is kind of interesting. It's kind of weak for a major perk, to be honest with you guys. Sonic Disruption, I think, is underrated. I definitely think there's a lot of situations where that's very useful in duels in certain situations, but I think that one's kind of cool, actually. It definitely changes how you use the cooldown, even for a minor perk. But what if you could charge the bow on wall climb again, like, you know, back in the day? I think that one's a huge quality of life change. What if Storm Arrow resets your lunge? Okay, maybe a little bit broken, but again, come on, perks, guys, right? So popping Storm Arrow resets your lunge cooldown. Explosive Arrow instead of Sonic, so you can choose as a major to replace Sonic with Explosive AoE Explosive. Again, that's opportunity cost. You lose the scouting from the character. Maybe it actually reveals people who the explosive hits, but only if it hits the people. Does like AoE damage, lots of situations, lots of comps, so that would be useful. And then I gotta cook with this one. Major perk, Double Dragons. So your dragons don't last as long, are a little bit narrower, and do a little bit less DPS, but you get 2 of them. So you go, ooh, you know, one. So it's like a double bam and then bam, and you can individually aim each one. I'm never gonna do that again. And it allows for the ultimate to provide a little bit more consistent value. It's not so much kill value, so much as like better zoning value. So you can like bait them with one direction, then catch them with one direction, then force them in the open, then angle. And obviously it would have to be compensated by a little bit less DPS. Like, I don't know that you'd live by standing in it for sure, but like, it's not like, oh, a death trap for everything, but I think just it opened up so many more situations where you could use your dragon in different ways and more creativity, and like that's the best aspect of major perks for me, and I think it's definitely something that they should actually try. I think it'd be sick. Okay, Junkrat. I think global projectile speed boost would be kind of cool. I like the idea of frag cannon, but I think it's really bad for muscle memory to have. In the same way that the Hanzo perk, I didn't like the attack speed one as much. I didn't really delve into that because it just messes with muscle memory. And I think global projectile speed changes need to be happening. I think you gotta be really careful when you change the way a gun feels for just a specific perk. And I think that that's something that you kind of want to avoid. So I don't like frag cannon as a result. I think if that's something that we want to do, it needs to be a global change of the character. Okay, I think add trap utility. So we talk about the, where is it? Aluminum frame, right? I don't hate the idea of aluminum frame. I think it's a lot more useful than the hog one, because placing your trap out in the map is definitely something that Junkrat does more than Roadhog. But what if you could manually detonate it by pressing it a bit, again, for small AoE damage? So you're in a situation where they're just avoiding your trap, they're going around your trap, you're not trapping consistent value. What if you used it as like a self-defense tool or to control an angle? You hear a tracer going by and you detonate it early just for the extra little bit of chip damage, you know? Something to consider. I don't know how that visually look. Maybe a small like red light on the side of a trap. It just blows the steel parts apart. Something to consider. Nothing crazy here. This character doesn't need a ton more AoE sustain, and it would come at the cost of you losing your trap. Pirate's trick, this one was not my idea. Junkrat gets a 6-second, maybe this could be longer, probably needs to be longer, cooldown that allows him to do a directional dash by releasing explosion from his peg leg that does 55 AoE damage, just more mobility fun. And then a charge shot option could be something that would be interesting as well, where you lose your spam value, but you're able to click and hold, and you get that faster projectile speed because you're manually controlling it for selective shots. It doesn't necessarily mess up your muscle memory because you're doing it on purpose. You are in control. That one shot's going to go a little bit faster, a little bit tighter spread. Something to consider. Yeah, I think TikTok is cool. I think Nitro Boost is also cool as well, but yeah, I think there's more work that we could do. Okay, Mei. Man, I was so disappointed with Mei's perks. I think they're all really bad. They lean into the worst aspects of the character. They're annoying to play versus. They're not super fun to play with. Mei is one of my most favorite DPS, one of my favorite characters in the game in Overwatch 2. I hated Mei in Overwatch 1. I coached a lot of Mei in Overwatch 2 at the pro level, early in alpha and beta with Backbone, who I think is the best Mei of all time. And I learned so much about the character coaching and working with him. We developed our understanding of the way the character plays, like an off-angling DPS, controlling space, and not just walling off tank all the time, because if you're playing Mei into dive or in these more open maps, you've got to be really smart with how you use wall. And using Mei as a self-sufficient DPS that has a lot of dueling potential, a lot of utility, is really, really fun in Overwatch 2. I think she's super, super fun. And I think she's one of the most underrated heroes and wrongly played characters. I think most Mei players play her incorrectly, but maybe it's something for another video. And I think the perks lean into that. I think the perks emphasize that in all the wrong ways. I would love for a minor perk to spray the floor for movement speed. This is something that we came up with for a while ago. I've seen it a couple of times. I think it was done in maybe in a creator patch or an April Fool's long time ago. I'd see a lot of people like, oh, they'll never do it because you got to look directly at the ground. That's not true. Her primary fire has range. You can look at like a 45-degree angle and spray in front of you. You get movement speed for yourself or for also your team. This is something that they absolutely should do. It probably could also apply to your ultimate as well, because technically it's a frozen ring, so you can move around it. I would love a wall bounce, like Lifeweaver. So you talk about the pedal, so where you pedal up and you kind of jump, you get some momentum. Same thing with wall. Give her some verticality on wall, even more verticality on wall. Again, these are one of these or the other. You know, which do you want? Horizontal mobility? You want vertical mobility? I think the problem with the ice block perk is it doesn't change how you use the ice block at all. So you don't go, oh, I'm gonna ice block to do damage. Well, it's just less damage than your primary fire. So all it does is it discourages people from sitting on your ice block, which is nice, but I would like it so that ice block changes how you use the ability. Like, when do I ice block? Shouldn't just be a question. Like, that's the Reaper does that right now. Reaper dodges a cooldown. And then also with a lifesteal, it's like, man, do I want to change how I use Wraith? We could do that even more with Ice Block. I think the crucial thing is, when does the damage of the Ice Block apply? And so my idea is that you get an AoE projectile, like a little boosh, like a little ring of ice, that does damage and a slow pulse, just a small slow for like 1 or 2 seconds on exiting ice block. Not while you're in ice block the entire time, but only exiting ice block. So you actually might use your ice block early to catch somebody on a slow or to do a quick burst of damage. But if you do so, you lose the sustain of the ice block. You lose the ammo regeneration of the ice block. This would be a major, but just completely changes how you use ice block. It'd be really strong in duels. High risk, high reward, major perk. Please do this. I think this is so much more better than the brain dead perk that we have right now. The other one that's really toxic with me is the alt fire slow, which is horrendously toxic for a million different reasons. It stacks at 30%. It straight up ends the career of so many other tanks, which I think is not what Mei needs any more of. I think what we need to do is change something about the ultimate. So it no longer fully freezes you, provides that speed boost maybe that we talked about with the floor spray, but it also provides a damage boost to the Mei while she's inside of it. So you can actually ult yourself, provide speed boost, maybe even a small heal over time while you're in it, and it damage boosts you as well. So it's actually more of a selfish dueling, not just free. I mean, I think it should definitely do damage and slow targets that are inside of it, but it actually becomes a lot more thoughtful about when and where you use it. There was another idea, maybe we could shatter Mei wall early for a bit of burst damage as well. But basically, we're trying to let Mei be a utility-focused DPS character that can do a lot more things that isn't just freeze enemy, slow enemy, ha ha ha, you suck, this is a terrible situation, which the primary fire range, the stupid biting cold thing does, the ice wall duration, which is honestly just kind of more of a nerf. I just think her Mei perks are just really uninspired, and I think more understanding of what the character really does and what can do is really important to make this character's perks function a lot better. Okay, Pharah. Perks are probably fine. I think maybe concussive implosions may be a little too strong, but I do think fuel source is actually pretty underrated in a lot of situations versus a lot of comps. It's just maybe implosion's a little too strong with team play, but honestly I think Pharah's perks are pretty good. Okay, let's move on to Reaper here. So soul reaving and dire triggers kind of clunky here. You know, again, being a minor perk that collects soul globes from dead enemies, like again, it's just requires an elimination, requires you to walk over them, which is not great. And dire triggers is a cool idea, but it ends up kind of clunking. It doesn't do enough. I understand that they have to be careful with dire triggers, that it might overbreak burst damage, but it's definitely something they need to keep tweaking with, because as of right now, it's not that great. I think the soul reaving needs to be more of an auto collect or an animation or something that, like, if you walk kind of near the body, or maybe if you don't even walk near the body, if you just shoot them and they just, you know, I think that needs to happen, because as of right now, it's just straight up inferior to the TP one. It's too hard to collect most of the time. Dire triggers, again, can we change the clunkiness of that feeling without making it be too broken with burst damage? I think the lifesteal perk may need to be nerfed a little bit as well, the Ravenous Wraith, but I think overall that one is pretty interesting because it definitely rewards you for staying after Wraith, which is definitely cool. Some ideas here: free flight and ultimate, same movement speed, maybe slightly more would be really cool, so you can go up and down while you're ulting. Just allow you some more choice, more fun, who knows, maybe it's too strong, maybe it's too weak, I don't know. And then maybe some Wraith verticality, period, but your Wraith doesn't last as long. Some people were saying, oh, you mean like Moira Fade? No, not that fast. And not invisible, but definitely, again, providing some more options for you can Wraith up and down. You just can't quite go as far. Something to consider. I think overall the Reaper perks have like a decent vision. I think the character's in a much healthier state than he used to be. Sojourn. Okay, so Sojourn is another one of the ones where I kind of really didn't want to put work on a lot of her perks. I think part of her entire kit is just very clunky to me. But I think I might have given a potential solution here, so bear with me. So the problem with Sojourn is that you have a character that feels like she wants that railgun hero fantasy, this big blast. But the problem is that to have that big blast around the railgun means that her primary fire weaving in with the railgun. In other words, that railgun, boom, and then you can continue primary firing. That delay can't be too short, because otherwise it de-emphasizes the power of the railgun. So then there's this delay after railgun before you can primary fire again, which means that if railgun is too weak, the character is really weak. So they keep, basically the TLDR is that they can't decide whether this character should feel like this big impactful railgun shooter or whether this more like verticality focused, slightly projectile Soldier 76. And I've always been a fan of the latter, but I understand that the fantasy of the railgun is a lot of fun. So here's my idea here, and this may not be so much perk related as so much the character period. Tighter spread on primary fire. So get that spread tight so she actually do some damage at range. Nice job. Everyone's happy, right? Don't just shoot shields, farm rail, shoot backline. Okay, but the spread of your primary fire actually worsens the higher rail charge that you are. So that the higher charge that you get, your spread starts to decompose just a little bit, starts to spread out a little bit more to where it is currently. Higher and higher certain thresholds, I don't know, 50, 60, 80, 90, 100, whatever. To the point where when you're at 100 rail, it's really hard to do damage at range. And this is where things get really saucy. The delay post-rail, so that delay after shooting your rail and then you can primary fire again, that also scales with the charge of rail that you just fired. So basically, if you charge up a 40 charge rail and shoot it, and then primary fire immediately afterwards, immediately, just bam, super fluid, right? Just a little burst, but if you're like, oh, I'm gonna charge this rail up, I need this for this fight, boom. Like there's that longer delay. So it's a risk reward of whether you actually want to even choose your rail up. And think about the visuals and sound effects of like you're charging that rail and it's getting a little bit unstable and the weapon's starting to spread and it's like boom, like this uncontrollable cannon, right? But that comes at a cost. And like that's the crucial thing, is there is no real cost. There's no real reason to shoot your rail lower than it is right now. But with this change, not only can we have a character that can function without 100 rail all the time, but you're actually rewarded for it if you manage it in certain. It's a whole new skill expression, and it's a much healthier vision of how the character can function while still maintaining that option of having that big, juicy, powerful rail when you do charge it up. I think unquestionably something that they should try. A bit of, obviously it's my idea, so my ego is going to be like, oh, my bias, so is this great? I don't know if it's going to work out, but I definitely think it's something that they should try. So again, tighter spread on primary fire that worsens the higher rail charge that you get, while also increasing the delay post rail. So charging big rails rewards and punishes. Something to consider. Unrelated to perks. Perks. Bionic Stomp. Impact off of your slide, so the damage that you do down when you go down on target, there's an impact landing damage when you hit the ground. Either that, whether you're on the ground or whether you're coming down from the ground, that first initial bit of slide does a burst damage. I don't think you introduce CC into that, but it just kind of like a koom. Lore appropriate, given her legs, you get it. Disruptor Shot sucks in, it's a major, but it does significantly less damage. You'd have to tweak the range. I know they're very cautious about adding CC, but something to consider. Slide reloads or generates charge. I don't know if I like this, but it's something worth considering. And overclock her ultimate resets all of her cooldowns. Again, maybe too broken. Maybe it should just be your slide. I don't know. These are just ideas thrown out there. Yeah. That's basically it. Soldier 76. Stim pack feels awkward, but other than that, it's actually okay. I think a lot of people hate in Soldier 76's perks, which just shows how stupid people are. That was rude. You need to test them more. Sprint speed increase, reload while sprint is active is incredibly strong. The character overall still has weaknesses because he doesn't have the same spikes of value, but for the character's gameplay loop, agility training is amazing. Recycled pulse munitions is decent. For a minor perk, it's okay. And Field Emergency actually applies to yourself. I don't think people realize that, but Biotic Field increased by 100% on critical health allies. That's also you. Maybe there needs to be a terminology update because a lot of the allies things do apply to yourself, and I don't think people realize that. Same thing with Winston Bubble. Long story short, maybe Helix can over ammo your ammunition. The one problem with maybe recycled pulse munitions is that generally a lot of time you're opening with Helix into burst fire. So using that perk and then opening with Helix, which is a lot of the time I use Helix, kind of feels like a waste. Like it forces you into a weird gameplay loop that's really not worth it, which is shooting first then ammo, helixing, which is not great a lot of time. So what if it over ammoed? So like if you helix and you hit the helix on the start of your clip, it can over ammo 5 or 10 bullets to your clip. So you actually extend your clip an extra 5 or 10, maybe not the full 15. But again, introduces some choices. So like if I really want to be ammo efficient, I open with primary fire. But if I want to open with helix, I still get something of a boost. Something to consider. And maybe even Helix self knockback increased by 50%. This would be a minor perk, but you can actually send yourself further, kind of like Zarya's alternate fire. Last thing would be you'd have to figure out a way to use stim pack, like quality of life stim pack up. It feels like too much of a punishment for the reward. It's a really good idea. I love the idea. I think they should stay with it, but I think they should continue to iterate and tweak it to make it feel a little bit more worth it. Sombra. Sombra's a bit of a tough one. You have to try to find perks that don't lean into the worst aspects of the kit. Viral efficacy feels pretty meh, feels pretty niche. It does work on deployables. In other words, if you get an elimination on a freaking Symmetra turret, Torbjorn turret, anything, Winston Bubble, it does reset or reduce by 3 seconds, but still feels not as good as the other perk, which basically immediately allows you to heal up again and go back in faster. And I think stack overflow is just really toxic. Like, it's hard to land, but 100% increased hack duration is just crazy. I really don't like that concept at all. It's the worst aspect. Please remove this. Questron thought that canceling stealth early after you've used your translocator should refund a small portion of your locator cooldown. So the idea is that if you leave stealth, you're rewarded with a faster translocator. Now, in theory, you could reposition a lot faster, especially early fight, so that it would have to be not too much of a locator cooldown reduction, but mid-fight, it would allow you to reposition yourself at a much faster uptime and allow for a more fluid choice with your rotations. Very similar to what we talked about with the Ramattra Nemesis form, fluid forms earlier. This goes, okay, if I'm going to spend a lot of time out of stealth, I can reposition a little bit faster. I think it's a great idea. Big shout out to Questron. This would be a major, and there would be a ceiling of how long you could reduce your cooldown, probably by like 2 seconds. So if you canceled immediately, you don't have translocator again. You guys still got to wait like 4 seconds, right? But I think it would be a really cool quality of life change, open up a lot of flexibility, and I can't imagine coaching somebody with this perk and how many more discussions we'd have about repositioning, which I think is really cool. It's the best aspect of Sombra, which is the ability to reposition. The worst aspects being more the permanent stealth or hack or whatever. Not the permanent stealth, but yeah. Okay. Another one would be the other minor, instead of viral efficacy, something to do with health packs. So like if you grab a health pack, you gain a small speed boost. So in the same way that using translocator with Control-Alt-Escape allows you to regenerate your HP faster, this one would basically say, okay, if you're going to play around health packs, you get a small benefit. So either you're out of combat healing or health pack healing, you can kind of choose which playstyle you want to lean into. And this minor perk would just allow you to get a little bit more bonus from health packs. Maybe it would heal you for a little bit more. Maybe health packs would provide you for a small speed boost, as I said. I don't know, just something to consider here that would allow you to change your gameplay loop of where you're playing. And finally, I think White Hat is a cool idea. I just think the heal over time, the total heal amount should be spread out over a longer period of time. So like maybe the heal amount is the same, but the heal over time, instead of 2 seconds, I believe, or 1 second, it's 3 seconds or 4 seconds. So it's a smaller or slower heal over time, much more useful. And honestly, maybe even allow them to speed boost. So if you hack somebody, they get a slight speed boost. All I can think about tank players all of a sudden loving Sombra players. I don't know. You know me with speed boost, guys. I freaking love the idea, and something worth considering. But okay, Symmetra. I think Symmetra's perks are a little bit overhated. I think some of her perks are kind of okay. I'm not as big of a fan of the extra sentry turret. It's probably the more toxic aspect of her kit, and 3 is totally fine for controlling a lot of different space. I think the extra range on her primary fire is really strong, but kind of toxic. Like it basically means that the frontline Symmetra and like brawl matchups is really freaking dangerous, which she kind of already is. Shield battery is okay too, but yeah, some ideas here that aren't, it's not so much like the perks of Symmetra are bad, so much as that I'm not sure if they're super healthy. And I think similarly to May, I think Symmetra perks showed a little bit of ignorance with what Symmetra can do. And I've coached a lot of high-level Symmetra. I've worked with a lot of high-level Symmetra players, and I've talked with a lot of Symmetra mains, and I think they have a lot of good ideas with the character. And I think there's some of these niche characters like May, as I said, where I think they need to spend more time exploring mains and seeing what they do, because there's some missed opportunities here. So, in terms of engaging options, right? So I think hitting a fully charged alternate fire should ramp your beam up to 2 automatically. That would be a major thing. So it would allow you in more situations to actually use your beam in a duel. The problem with Symmetra's beam is it does a lot of damage, but it takes a long time to ramp up. So it's basically used in the most toxic way on shields and tanks, which it's already good at that. Even with a shield heal, it's unnecessary. So how about if you hit a fully charged alt fire, you're able to quickly ramp your beam up to level 2. So you can actually use it in a 1v1. As it is right now, with this weird situation versus especially mobile characters, you're actually spamming your ranged option at point blank range. It's very unintuitive and clunky. It means a certain percentage of your kit, hey kitty, you don't actually end up using. So hitting fully charged alt fire immediately ramps beam up to 2. In addition to that, I don't know how many of these are perks versus just kit changes. I think that beam ramp time needs to be reduced. So you go 1, 2, 3, or you start at 1, 2, 3, and but the ramped damage is reduced. So in other words, you can ramp your beam up faster, but the total amount of damage is reduced. So there's more situations when you can actually get to a level 3 beam. So you're rewarded for using your beam in a duel, but you're not just, again, burning shields to high heaven, okay? And finally here, I'm kind of cooking with this one. Turrets give shield HP, 25, 50 HP, over health, shields, whatever, to a teammate that's nearby. Maybe they could even increase the HP of the turret by 10 or 15 or whatever. Why not have a DPS support? Why not? Like, why are we locked into like, oh, we can't? Why not? It's what makes her unique. It's cool. They're still breakable. It's not, you can break the turret. I don't think it would actually heal. It would just provide a bit of overhealth at the start of the engagement. You could use it on, and that changes how you use turrets. Do I want a turret for Scout? Or do I want to put a turret on my Zenyatta? Do I want to put a turret on myself? Like, there's so many cool choices that are opened up there that don't necessarily break sustain by any means. Let's open it up. Let the utility DPS do some utility crap, you know? Instead of just basically beaming tank. This character has immense potential in her kit that I think with a lot of her balance changes and a lot of her perks just really show that they don't really fully understand what this character can do. It feels like the only utility that they're aware of or focusing on is the teleport as a team, which is very useful, but that's only like a small part of what Symmetra can do in a grand open space. You know, there's so much more that they can do with this character, and I hope that they continue to do that. All right, Torbjorn. Obviously, Craftsman is a bit of a meme. You know, it's fun. It's just sadly, it's silly, but it's not good enough even to be good silly. So I think maybe a minor explosive here. I've been doing this for too long. A minor perk could be that you could destroy turret early for a small explosion. So it would change maybe how you use turret, whereas right now turret is basically very low risk options. Hide it, hide it, hide it. Don't let it get destroyed before the fight starts. Then it's really strong mid-fight. Well, what if you place your turret aggressively on a really aggressive flank, and then as they walk through the choke, it's like a trap. Bam! Blow it up. You lose your turret, but you get something out of it. It would change how you use turret in more situations. And then honestly, give him back a button or something that allows him to give teammates armor. Maybe just one teammate, and it would have to be temporary armor. Maybe it's done at the expense of his overload. Like, maybe there's some cost here. You know, you could, but like, again, kind of going back to the Symmetra thing, let's lean into this hero fantasy a little bit. Let's give the guy a little bit of utility here. As it is right now, Torbjorn is pretty much just a vomiter of spam damage down the choke. He's really strong right now. He just outputs an ungodly amount of damage, and that's kind of all he does. So why don't we move away from that a little bit? Let's allow him to have more choices with what he does. I think the wall turrets are really cool. I think making more choices like that would be fun, but not just offensive choices. What if you toss an armor on a teammate, but that cost you some of your overload self-heal with your overhealth? I don't know, there's just like a lot of things that you could do with this character. And think about, like, that would actually be useful on attack too. Like, that would lean more into, because that's just generally useful. It's not just all about, heck, the destroying turret is also better, more useful on attack, because you don't have time to set up turrets. You drop turret on backline, blow it up, and then buff a teammate with armor. And then, you know, again, we're making different choices with what you do instead of just, spam down choke or pop overload. And I think there's just a lot more they can do with the character. Okay, we're gonna keep going here. Tracer. So Tracer was, again, she's perfect. Leave my baby as she is. Don't do too much with her. I really don't like the majors with Tracer. They're either overtuned or just not good. I think it needs to be one blink, not three. I know, but like, what's so weak? It's not. One blink is a big deal. It's huge. That alone puts it just as good as the overshield one, if not better. I think there's some ideas of what they could do with Pulse Bomb. I initially had an idea of like Pulse Bomb grants a temporary 2 seconds, 50% heal reduction effect to help counter things like Bap's Lamp or make sticking tanks somewhat useful. But you have to be careful with that. I don't want Pulse Bombing tank to become like the meta. So I think there's maybe some things they could do with Pulse Bomb. One other thing that I think is really really worth doing for maybe a major in replacement of the shield one is buffing melee after blink. So if you land a melee within 1 second of blinking, you're refunded 5 ammo or 25% of your blink charge. So if you hit a melee after blink, your blink, hit another melee, so it rewards skill play. There's a lot of opportunity costs for landing a melee as a Tracer. However, that is a part of mid and high level Tracer gameplay loop in terms of dueling. So the more melees that you land, the more blinks that you get. So it's a cost, benefit, risk, reward, and it rewards skill play without necessarily completely changing the gameplay loop. So it basically takes something that's already good with Tracer and allows for more choice with how you do it without breaking the character. I think this one plus the one blink refund for major, it needs to be the case. I think like those are probably the best expression of healthy skill with a character. I did have another idea from a viewer that said, what if you could cancel recall early by tapping E? So in other words, during the animate, you kind of pause it, like cancel it really quick. But I don't know how easy that would be to code or whether that would be good or not. It's just something worth considering. But I really think that like you could be really careful what you do with Tracer. There are certain things about the character that just leave her as she is. She's great. Don't tweak her. She's high. High skill, high reward. I don't think you want to even change the gameplay loop. She doesn't need it. Venture. I'm not sure how I feel about Venture's range with, where is it? Smarter Excavator. And Clobber is honestly not all that useful as a major either. Feels like more of a minor where you can get more shields when you hit a melee, but you know, you hit melees pretty frequently eventually, but it's definitely not all the time, and it's definitely not enough to be considered a major, especially when Smarter Excavator is so freaking good. So some ideas here, maybe more dash damage when you're burrowed. So I think the last I checked with burrow is just like 5 or 10 damage. So when you're burrowing and then you drill dash, you know, it kind of boops them just a tiny bit and does a tiny bit of damage. It's really, really small. We could significantly bust that damage to change how you use your combos, which I think would be really cool. Again, we're trying to find aspects of Venture that are underutilized or underexplored. I think burrow damage, drill dashing while burrowed could be interesting. Entering burrow could suck people in just a little bit or pull them in just a tiny bit. Leaving burrow could give shield HP to allies. Maybe that one's a little too silly. I don't know, just different aspects of Venture that could be maybe utilized a little bit more. But again, you have to be really careful with Venture. All right, Widowmaker. Widowmaker I really did not want to do, but I come up with a couple of them. Smaller ammo count with her weapon, but a faster SMG fire rate so that she's able to defend herself a little bit better. But again, she can't just spam, like it's a much smaller clip. Shorter cooldown on grapple, but grapple goes a shorter distance. So you have like 4 seconds reduced cooldown on grapple, but the distance with which you can grapple is cut by like 30-40%. So you're actually not able to reposition as far, but you're able to reposition more frequently. Something to consider. Finally here, coinciding with that other perk, you have a faster shot charge rate. So you can charge your shots 10-15% faster, but much harsher fall off. What is Widowmaker's fall off right now? I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. But basically, I can pull up the wiki, but I don't have time. You have to be like, your fall off basically kicks in, 30, 35, 40% faster. So you have to go like significantly closer to those threats, but you're rewarded for it by charging your shots faster. Still a one-shot character, but a one-shot character that is actually more punishable now. I think a lot of the problems with people with Widowmaker is not so much that the one-shot, although that's definitely the main one. It's the fact that I can't really interact with her. So encouraging her to play in a range where she is more punishable, even with the grapple one, right? Where like, okay, she can reposition a lot more, but I feel like I can actually reach where she repositions. Something to consider. Again, there's only so much you could do with the character, but I think those are probably the healthiest expressions of different choices for the Widowmaker, but also not completely obnoxious to play versus. Okay, we are almost done here. We're going to move on to support here, and we're going to keep going here. Ana. Wow. Really not a fan of some of the Ana perks. I know that they're fun, but they are just really incredibly strong, and they're really not fun to play versus. Not every perk needs to be fun to play versus, but I think Ana really kind of breaks the curve in how egregious some of them are. Groggy is just really frustrating and not balanced. Nano is obviously overtuned. I think the headshot one has grown in me a little bit. I'm still not sure how I feel about it with Ana, but it's not. I think maybe it's just because of how broken the Nano one is that I've not really been confronted with how I feel about it. But yeah, the Nano Boost duration and or efficacy has to be reduced. I think it is a double ultimate, essentially. It just needs to not last as long for the Ana herself, or it needs to not be a full efficacy Nano. Like there needs to be some give or take here. It needs to be, you don't get the damage reduction, or you get the damage reduction but not the damage, or you get both but it's a smaller percentage, or you get both but it's only for half the duration of Nano. That's probably the easiest visual one to communicate, but yeah. Question also with bouncing nade, should that apply the second nade effect or just damage? So in other words, should we also apply the anti-effect on the second bounce? I think that's probably too strong. Makes it too easy to land anti-nade. Can it just do damage or healing without also doing the buff or debuff aspects of it? Instead of Groggy, what if you got movement speed after hitting Sleep Dart for 2 seconds? So you hit the Sleep Dart, and your movement speed's increased by 30% for 2 seconds. So if you hit a Sleep Dart, you're able to rotate away from that threat. It would also even be used offensively. So if you sleep the Mauga, if you hit the Sleep Dart at the Mauga, you can reposition yourself and go for a more aggressive angle. Something to consider. Probably the much healthier version of Groggy. There's another perk you can kind of lean into for Major, which would be Combat Medic, where a lot of people were really trying to give Ana like serious mobility, and I really don't like that. I think the healthiest version of movement or mobility for Ana is more of she can reposition between fights or between rotations. So Combat Medic would be you have 10% out of combat movement speed, like Genji or Tracer, and you have extra melee damage. I don't know, something that you can allow yourself to reposition between fights or before fights or so on. I just don't think giving Ana dash or wall climb, or some people are like, what if you threw your nade and you could move with your nade? Or I don't know. I think the character has limitations, but she has so many tools of dealing with those limitations, kind of like an Ashe, that I honestly think they just leave her as is. Let's not change the entire gameplay loop with this character. Let's just find some fun or interesting ways that you can utilize different parts of her kit. And I say this as an Ana player, like she's my favorite character to play. Baptiste. I think Baptiste has some decent ones. I think that the faster projectile speed or deploying of Lamp, probably instead of the field medicine one, that where we have basically restores 80 health to nearby allies. I think it's a little bit too strong with a Lamp. I think the problem with Lamp is not necessarily it's not strong enough with what it does. It's too difficult or hard to land too far away, I think is the problem. So a faster projectile speed, or it's just easier to deploy or faster to deploy. Maybe the Lamp itself has a higher health threshold. So in other words, you don't drop to 10% with Lamp, you drop to 25 or 30 or 35%. I know they've nerfed that over time, but maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better than the heal after the fact. I don't know. I think there's some different things they could do with Lamp to make it more useful within the Overwatch 2 headspace. I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole here, but you could also make it a damage reduction field where it actually allows you to use it more early in engagement or more offensively with a lower cooldown maybe. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here. I think the concept of a Lamp as a whole in Overwatch 2 is just really clunky as a projectile. It's really bad. It should be almost like a targeted buff or a targeted location. Whoa. What if it was like turret? Like you could place it like a hazard wall. Like that would completely deal with a lot of problems. And you could still have, because the problem is like you want the projectile that kind of fits with the lore of like he's got the abilities and the things that he throws out. Like instead of just like you don't want like a dart that you throw out. It doesn't fit, you know? But what if it was targeted like that, you know? Like, what if that's just something you did with the base kit and you made it a damage reduction field so you could use it on yourself or around your area? Oh man, that would help so much. You could use it anytime that you want. And then obviously deploy rate, projectile, higher health threshold. That would make it so much better than Overwatch 2. Okay, you guys get the idea. I think also the damage boost and shift, I think that's Assault Burst. Yeah, it's a good idea. It's just not strong enough and it's too much of a nerf because I think the damage, the attack speed buff isn't enough. And the instant heal is by far the most important part of the regenerative burst. So I like that there's some risk reward. I like that, a cost benefit, but I don't think it's balanced well enough to take over the other things. So probably need more attack speed, maybe last longer, maybe you get a small self heal. There just needs to be some tweaks off of that to make it more worth it. Okay, Brigitte. Longer Inspire duration, more armor pack usage, or more armor pack burst heal. It's just it's just not good. It's things that she's already relatively good at. And the cool perks that are there are just not good enough. I think a big one would be to give armor pack 25 over health back. It used to have this back in the day, but they nerfed it because they honestly removed it because armor over heal was really too strong. Let's not do armor anymore. Let's just overheal. So if you armor pack somebody and they're below a certain health threshold, they can go up to 25 health higher than they already are. Really changes how you use armor pack. Really when you use armor pack could be really cool. That would probably be a major perk. 10% movement speed after you shield bash, so you're able to reposition and move around a lot more aggressively. That's a huge problem with Brigitte and versus a lot of poke comps. Huge quality of life change. I like that one a lot better. Shield bash omnidirectional, but you lose a certain cooldown or lose a certain distance with it. I don't really know. That was another idea from the community. So you can go up, down, sideways. I'm not sure if that's balanced or not. And then a crazy one was when you use whip shot, you can choose to hold the ability down. And if you hold the ability down as it hits somebody, not only do you knock them back, but you pull yourself to that location. I don't know, maybe it's kind of silly, but I really like the overhealth major perk. I like the bash speed after using, or the movement speed after bash. Again, more offensive, more defensive dynamics that allow Brigitte to have more choices with how she's using things and don't break her versus matchup that she's already favorable versus. Okay, Illari. Her minors are just not super interesting, I find. I feel like the whole concept of like flight turn during ult is not that great. I mean, it's interesting. I think it's not bad. And the healing pylon having a slightly reduced cooldown, not the most interesting. Majors are overall, I think, pretty good. Maybe early pylon pulse for more. So there's a timing window of when pylon really is useful. And so it's not just about like basically leave it and you kind of turn your brain off, but like if you time the pylon at the right time, you get more healing for the first couple of pulses. Minor perk, doing something with her melee where it applies like a burning DOT or something. Like I think that's a really underutilized part of her kit. I remember seeing that sick melee animation. I'm like, bro, that looks sick. That's super, super cool. Like I love that, but it doesn't do anything. But let's do something with it. You know, like a 15 DOT, so it does 45 or yeah, melee already does 40, so like 55 damage or something, right? Like just something with a melee could be a cool minor perk. And I also think there could be a cool a way to use you blow up the pylon for damage. Like I know we've had a couple of those where you detonate the ability early, but I do think that that's an underutilized concept where you basically pay to destroy your own thing, but you get something as a reward. Blow up your pylon allows you to do a little bit of damage. I don't know, something to consider. Different ways and different thought processes about how you use pylon, I think is probably the direction that you want to go with Illari. Okay, Juno. I think perks are overall okay. I do think the Hyper Boost one, using both abilities, feels pretty niche, and it doesn't really line up very well with how the gameplay loop of Juno at a high level is played very often. It's not useless, it's just not the most useful. I like the idea of shooting while torpedoing. I've been asking for that for ages. I know that that is a difficult thing to animate potentially, but I think it would be a really, really cool quality of life update and or offensive and or defensive output that rewards skill play. Love it. I think boosting speed ring range would be super nice in certain maps and certain situations. So an extra 5 meters of speed ring. They actually boosted the range in the early playtest. I think you can go further with that as a part of a perk. Less fall off could be useful. They nerf that a little bit. Maybe they revert that a little bit. I'm not as big of a fan of that one. Instead of faster lock. Wait a second, what is the torpedo one? Pulsar torpedoes lock into allies 35% faster. How about not just that, but also pulsar torpedoes travel faster to allies. So not only do they lock faster, but the actual projectile itself gets to the target a little bit faster. Could be really useful. And another idea that chat had was like, what if you hold the torpedoes button and you don't actually detonate it, and it applies a buff to the allies that you see. So you actually don't even use the torpedoes for the actual healing itself, but it applies like a certain amount of heal over time or a certain small speed boost. Maybe not. But yeah, there's a lot of ideas with Juno. We didn't even talk about her ultimate, but there's a lot of ideas that you can do with Juno. I don't think her perks are half bad right now. I think both of her major perks are actually pretty good. Again, wasn't sure how I felt about headshots with her, but honestly, feels okay given the range limitations that she has maybe. And then the other one I think is also something that's a bit underexploited as well. Kiriko, perks are okay. I think Kiriko is a lot, Kirk has a lot of problems where like her perks maybe exacerbate parts of her kit that are problematic, but I don't think the perks are the problem when people complain about Kiriko. It's just the general gameplay loop similar to Mauga. I think I had a whole rework with Kiriko where she has like a heal resource thing where it actually plays into the whole Fuda, where it's way more heal over time. You only have 3 or 4 heals that regenerate slowly, kind of like a Doomfist shot, but even slower. But they provide a small heal over time and a small speed boost or a small attack speed boost or a small cooldown reduction. And then you can teleport through, if you teleport through walls, the range distance is reduced. But these are like less to do with perks, more to do with the general gameplay loop of the character. Generally, the heal resource concept with her just doesn't really work all that well. So here's what I was saying. Maybe Shuffle can only be used on the initial target that you teleported away from or the location that you teleported away from. But honestly, I don't even know how that would work because what if you're by yourself? So maybe that one's scratched. But I think the big thing is that the Suzu speed boost is a good idea, but is just not good enough to reward not picking Shuffle. I think what you could do is if we took some of the intangibility aspects of Suzu, invulnerability aspects of Suzu, you could actually have it refund more of the Suzu cooldown if the target is over 75% HP. So in other words, if you Suzu somebody early for burst damage or for the speed, you're rewarded by getting your Suzu back faster. As it is right now, it's like it's nice to have Suzu speed boost, but because it's such a long cooldown, it's just not worth utilizing unless somebody's in a really bad spot, in which case the speed boost is kind of useful, but it's just never used offensively. Like the concept of Suzu is that it shouldn't only have to be used defensively. That's the problem with abilities like Life Grip and Lamp with Baptiste, where it's like it really only does the one thing. It does a lot of things, but it's all centered around survivability. It's never thought to utilize offensively like an anti-nade or anything like that. And I think that's where people's frustrations, because it's always used to deny. So we got to go, okay, what is a perk that we can actually utilize that speed boost offensively, but it not feeling like a complete waste? We're gonna be getting into that with Lifeweaver, with Life Grip in a few moments, but I think Suzu has the exact same problems. Maybe Suzu could lose the invulnerability but give overhealth, maybe an attack speed buff. I think when we talk about Kiriko, you're gonna have to delve deeper into why people don't like aspects of her kit, and maybe delve deeper into like what the perks can do to help with that. But I don't know that that's a conversation that you can have just around perks, sadly. All right, Lifeweaver. Cleanse probably should just be default with the character. This character also desperately needs a faster weapon swap. They've done a really good job with the character since release of making the character just less awful to play versus and less awful to play. But I think there needs to be continual quality of life stuff. The cleanse needs to happen. It's a freaking whatever long cooldown. It needs to cleanse, for crying out loud. The weapon swap needs to be fast. faster. I think Weave, in terms of the healing, the life weaving, and then the Super Bloom are good ideas, but they're not quite strong enough, and the execution isn't great. And then Life Cycle is just bad. Generating 10 health per second is just way too strong and brain dead. The Healing Seed is also just like you're already dead, so it was always a goofy idea, and they're bringing it back. No, just let it die. Let it die. Let it go away. Just be gone, okay? If Life Grip is used on above 75% HP target, the cooldown of Life Grip is halved. This is a major perk, maybe something even in the base kit, honestly. You can reposition people with Life Grip now without having your get out of jail free card for your tank gone. You can actually reposition people and get your cooldown back faster. People are like, oh, but my Lifer is going to troll me. Sorry, Life Grip is here to stay. I was on your side, but I've given up. We're here. Life Grip, it's here to stay. We got to make the most of it. We got to let Lifeweavers learn how to use the cooldown. We got to let Lifeweavers, high-level Lifeweavers, use it for more repositioning value. It is underutilized part of the kit. It's high risk, high reward. I get it, but it needs to be usable and not just to save people. Lifeweaver can cancel Life Grip by pressing the ability again and maintain the momentum of the target that is Life Grip so you can slingshot enemies. Just trust me, if we're gonna have Life Grip in the game, you need to let people do things with it, okay? Okay, the weaving perk is good. The concept of using your defensive cooldown to enhance your healing output is fine, but the healing needs to be stronger. Or you can need to change the charge speed. I know people are gonna be like, oh, but heal bot. Yeah, some will have to keep an eye on for sure. I think it takes too many thorns to land the bloom burst, so something to keep an eye on. It's kind of useful versus fat targets, but it's really hard to land in duels. Something to keep in mind. Maybe the damage that dealt tweaks your dash cooldown, so more damage means slightly faster dash. Maybe you reduced pedal HP, but when you're on the pedal, you have a slight damage reduction, maybe more utility with pedal in that aspect. There were a lot of interesting ideas from my community about Lifeweaver. We didn't go into many of them today, but there's a lot that you could do with the character once you exploit different aspects and explore different aspects of the kit that are interesting. We want to avoid invulnerable support that heal bots, and I think too many of his perks lean more into that instead of away from that, because the character has a lot of things, like a lot of tools in the box that you could tweak with. Okay, Lucio. Wall ammo miner doesn't seem as useful as the boop distance. I talked in Irvine when I went to play test a lot of these things about an air dash. He has something similar in the stadium, not quite, that allows you to dash sideways on a cooldown when you're in mid-air. And talking with Aspen and Frogger about it, they were less on board because it would mess with your muscle memory, or you would actually utilize, you'd burn your, or no, it was SK2, you'd burn your, you'd actually jump to do your dash, but it was meant to do it on a wall. It would just be just a total disaster, right? Because it would mess up your wall climbing, basically. Like, you would move from wall to wall and you'd actually tap jump too early and accidentally dash when you meant to wall climb. Wouldn't work. Well, I realized when I came home, why would we have air dash on your jump cooldown? Why would you not have it on your crouch cooldown? Or you just even about, like, just basically you have this concept of when you were in the air, crouching can dash you in the direction that your arrow keys or your controller is pressing. More mobility equals better, skill play, better, way fun. And then finally here, because why not, sound barrier does impact damage. It scales with the distance from the ground. No, I will not elaborate. Mercy. We need more motivation for this character to move. I think shifting damage boost to partial speed boost would allow more targets to be useful for the pocket instead of just AFK pocket. Okay, so basically, here's the problem with Mercy. AFK pocket, DPS on angle, not very good at pocketing tank, not very dynamic with who and when you're pocketing, and the most fun aspect of the character is moving around, and it just doesn't reward that as much. I think even the 225 HP might be tough with her. Partial speed boost, less damage boost, some reason to move. I had an idea, probably a bad idea, but it's worth putting out at least for the spirit of what I'm trying to accomplish. Maybe you guys are smarter than me, which was when you overheal somebody, you can overheal them to up to 25 or 50 HP. Okay, so you can go around and it decays after like 8 seconds or whatever. But you're rewarded for moving around and healing people to overhealth. But you're like, oh, but what if you just pocket something? They just permanently have overhealth. No, if you damage boost a target, they immediately lose their overhealth. I don't know. Flash heal is a good concept, but it needs to be done quicker. I think some sort of wing or staff attack thing. Guardian Angel, it charges up a melee that knocks back targets and does more damage. Explosive Souls, unironically, would not be a bad idea. And then I think this was I think this was Cassidy who came up with this idea, but you can have a cooldown that allows you to drop a soul, so you can use it for repositioning. So you can be like, okay, I'm pocketing this target, I'm gonna throw my soul there, and okay, so I would get out, even if I don't see a teammate, I can still reposition, but it's a longer cooldown, or a cooldown you have to manage, right? And then you can also use that cooldown with the explosive soul thing. So if you do it aggressively, you can blow stuff up, but then if you use it defensively, you can use it to reposition. It's not permanent, by the way. Also, that soul, that's a temporary soul. It lasts like maybe 3 seconds, something like that. Like, I don't know. There's like how can we make this character move around and not AFK? I actually think Mercy mains kind of fall into the Symmetra Mei thing, where it's like, I understand the character's limitations. I agree that she's really frustrating when she's meta with the current implementation, but there are things that the character has in her kit that are just underutilized. And I think that like if you talk to high level Mercy mains, and aspect, like, what are the most fun aspects of the kit, what are some ideas, and iterate more on those ideas. I've always been rewarded by that when I've talked with Mercy players, and I think it's a really underexplored aspect of the kit or the character. Movement equals fun. Standing still, AFK pocketing, not fun for both the Mercy and playing versus the Mercy. Res, not fun. And I think there's a lot more they could do with the character. And this is just me scratching the surface of ideas. Moira, I don't think the longer fade is as useful. I think it's kind of overrated. Fade duration is just not useful. You use it quickly to reposition. That's pretty much it. You don't want to be stuck locked out for a full half of a second. And then the anti-heal from damage orb is pretty spammy, obnoxious, and also not all that useful all the time. So I think having a small DOT when you fade through enemies as a minor perk could change how you use fade. So if it kind of rewards you for staying with fade or using fade to layer instead of fading to get away. So if you fade through an enemy, you get a little bit of extra damage. It's going to help your dueling, but make it a little bit more high risk, high reward. I know, it's Moira, I know. Orb speed is, I think, a no-brainer. I think this character needs faster orbs that slow down to the current speed that they have when they go past, but this allows you to have more range impact. Heck, you could even nerf the orbs if you allow them to actually reach locations faster. More map control, more space control. Orbs are too slow to reach the targets from any distance that's bigger than 20 meters as it is right now. Fading teammates, fading through teammates gives them a bonus heal effect, like an anti-nade, healing your teammates. You bonus heal them. You use your defensive cooldown aggressively or defensively on a teammate, you lose it, but same thing with nade, but your teammates benefit. I think less direct heal from her heal spray could also be interesting, but a longer heal over time. So a different play style where you don't just dump healing in your tank, but you actually can, instead of, what is it heal over time? Is it 2 seconds? Something like that. It could be, or 3 seconds. It could be like 4 or 5 seconds, right? Small heal, but lasts a long time. Very useful. Maybe a longer spray with their heal, a longer range with their heal, but less healing overall. Damage orbs are smaller, but stick. They have a faster travel time. They're smaller, but they actually stick, and they tick, 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 tick. Now, but they do significantly lower damage. Maybe you get 2 of them, or 2 orb cooldowns. Maybe you could do the same thing with heal orb, where heal orb has a much smaller range, but it can stick to a teammate and heal them up over time. There's a lot of things they could do with this character. Obviously, you know, maybe those are a little bit more pipe dream ideas that would take a lot more testing to find out what would be balanced, but generally leaning into at least the first couple of those ideas are interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, we are finally done. We have Zenyatta here. We've been here for over an hour and a half here. Okay. I don't think Zenyatta had the most useful or potent or interesting perks. I do think the character, like a lot of the more niche, tight characters, not niche, but tighter characters like Winston, Zenyatta, or Winston Tracer, so on, there's a lot less to do. I think in general, some of his perks feel a little bit weird or niche. I think duality, feels a little bit tank spammy, right? Feels kind of useful in that situation and not as much in other circumstance. Some small things here. Delay after alternate fire could be reduced slightly as a minor perk. Maybe Snap Kip gives you verticality. I think maybe you can, I think you should probably change the hovering with Ascendance to where you don't have to double tap your jump. You just hold the jump. That would be a huge quality of life perk with that perk. Quality of life change for that perk, excuse me. But we came up with a couple other ones. So let me know what you guys think. I think Harmony Speed Boost, I'm so easy to predict, would be really fun. I really like what they did with Junkerqueen's Revenge. I don't know if I want 2 Harmony Orbs, but having it where you could actually provide not just the 30 healing over second, which is basically exclusively useful on a squishy, providing a small speed boost could actually mean that, okay, now I got to think who needs the Harmony Orb. And I like that one better than the aspects of duality when it comes to the perks. LOS grace period could be another major one where your Discord and Harmony have a slightly longer grace period behind a wall so that they don't fall off as quickly. Maybe it could just be for one of the orbs, like Harmony Orb, where it's like an extra 1 or 2 seconds before it falls off. Pretty useful and a lot of comps in a lot of situations. And finally, this one I think is pretty darn good. Trance you can use your cooldowns during trance. You can't primary fire, you can't do damage, but you can use your cooldowns. You can cycle your harmony on a target that's split from you, or you could cycle your discord onto a different target, or apply it if you forgot to. Huge quality of life change to an ultimate that's honestly been pretty bad in Overwatch 2. Very basically used pretty selfishly at the highest levels because it doesn't do a lot of healing in the way that Zenyatta positions with only one tank. He's not often close enough to be able to do anything, plus the DPS passive, yada, yada, yada. I just think being able to use your cooldowns during trance would be a massive quality of life change and probably a great major perk idea, especially in those maps that are a little bit more wide open. So I think they could have cooked a little bit more Zen perks. I don't want them to get too silly with it because I think Zenyatta's kit is designed to be very fluid and very simple and yet very high skill and expression. And I think a lot of these perks provide that exactly without really breaking the character. Okay, 1 hour and a half in. That's all I've got. I don't know how many we had there. It was like 105, 110 different ideas. Maybe more. Obviously, we wanted to go into detail about what I think about the characters, good and bad with the perks. I wanted to provide as many ideas as I possibly could. Shout out to the developers for coming up with a system that I've really enjoyed playing into from a competitive integrity and competitive analysis standpoint. And honestly, it's just really fun. So let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. This is obviously not a perfect list by any means. This is my best attempt at spending an efficient use of my time, about 20-25 hours on and off stream with several thousand suggestions from my community and several hundred from myself and kind of encapsulating them. I'd say about 70% of these were mine, 30% from the community. So, and as I said, even the ones that were mine were I was given heavy feedback from the community about things that were good, things that were bad, specifically my Discord community, my Twitch chat. Big shout out to you guys. Thank you guys so much for the feedback, so much for the help. It really goes to show the power of groupthink, you know. Maybe I'm using that term incorrectly, but the concept of that, like no one person in an isolation can really, you need feedback. You need people saying this sucks and this is why. And so even if you disagree with them, it provides some meaningful context. And a lot of people come up with a lot of ideas that I just would not have come up with, especially for some of those characters that I don't play as much. I coach every character to a high level, but I don't play them enough to necessarily always come up with the best ideas. So obviously I might have cooked a little too hard. Maybe I undercooked a lot of these ideas. Maybe I poo-pooed some ideas that were actually good. It's really impossible to say without testing, but that's the nice thing about perks is that we can be confident. I mean, even right now in live, there's a couple of really silly perks, broken or weak, that are currently live in the game, and yet the game's still fun. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh.